In today's video, we will be looking at the GTX 1070 in 2023, Part 2. Now the GTX 1070 is a 7-year-old card, but we're going to see what it can do in 2023 in the latest games. The games we will look at today are Starfield, Cyberpunk 2077, Watch Dogs Legion and Shadow of the Tomb Raider. Now we actually purchased this 1070 for only £70 here in the UK, and it's the KFA 2 version, or I think it's called Galax. I think they've renamed or rebranded. But yeah, I think it's actually a pretty good deal for only £70, and let's see what it can do. So first up, Starfield at 1080p low, an average of 36, a minimum of 32, and a maximum of 44. And then the 1080p medium results, an average of 30, a minimum of 25, and a maximum of 36. And at 1080p high, an average of 23, a minimum of 20, and a maximum of 28. So the GTX 1070 is actually the minimum required GPU to run Starfield, and as we can see, you are getting just about 30 frames per second at 1080p low average. Now if you bumped it up to 1080p medium, you're probably again just about 30, but maybe a bit lower, and then once you go 1080p high, it's just not usable. But overall, yeah, I mean you can play Starfield at a console-like sort of experience with the 1070, and it's not too bad. Moving on to Cyberpunk 2077, 1080p low, an average of 74, a minimum of 15, and a maximum of 109. The 1080p medium results, an average of 62, a minimum of 36, and a maximum of 91. And the 1080p high, an average of 53, a minimum of 36, and a maximum of 73. So as we can see here, Cyberpunk is actually quite playable. Even at 1080p high, we got an average of 53, which isn't too bad. And if you play at 1080p medium, you will get a 60 FPS average. So that's actually really quite good for a 7-year-old card, and Cyberpunk 2077 is still quite a demanding title, so that's not bad actually. And I would say this is a pass for the GTX 1070 in Cyberpunk 2077. So not a bad result here. Watch Dogs Legion now, 1080p low, an average of 69, a minimum of 43, and a maximum of 98. And at 1080p medium, an average of 65, a minimum of 43, and a maximum of 93. And at 1080p high, an average of 57, a minimum of 32, and a maximum of 84. So again here, Watch Dogs Legion, it's only 1080p high where we don't get a 60 FPS average, but again, if you put it down to 1080p medium, you get a 65 frames per second average, so pretty good showing here again by the 1070, certainly a pass on this game as well. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have too much time to be able to review other games, unfortunately. I did want to get a few more modern games and a few more modern titles, but unfortunately, time has kind of been restricted on this video, and I do apologise, but it is where it is, and hopefully you guys are going to really try and support my channel, and then the more support I can get, the more longer I can put into these videos, and the more time I can put in, and better things can happen basically. So please do like this video if you are liking it. And lastly, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, 1080p low, an average of 117, a minimum of 88, and a maximum of 198. And at 1080p medium, an average of 89, a minimum of 66, and a maximum of 150. And at 1080p high, an average of 86, a minimum of 64, and a maximum of 142. So Shadow of the Tomb Raider is easily playable on the GTX 1070, passed all across the board there at 1080p high, even 86 average is very, very good, far more than your 60 FPS, which is what you're aiming for. So yeah, total pass here. But I know some people are going to say Shadow of the Tomb Raider is quite an old game now, and yes, it is. I do admit it is an old game, but overall I do think it's still a fairly demanding title, and the GTX 1070 is still actually holding up here. Remember, you do have 8GB of GDDR5 VRAM, so that's still pretty decent even in 2023. There are some cards even now, earlier cards that have only got 4GB or even 6GB for VRAM, so to have the 8GB in this card is pretty good, and overall it's still just about holding up in there, isn't it? I mean, yeah, Starfield is a push, and you're not really going to be able to run it very well, but you can run it if you're really pushed and you really want to play Starfield with your GTX 1070, you can do it. And there are a few more titles which are probably going to be more sort of 30 FPS or 40 FPS or so average, which were sort of more modern titles as well, but there are some titles that might push into the 60s even when they're 2 or 3 years old. Now, overall, would I recommend the GTX 1070? Yes, if you can get it for the right price. I only paid £70. I think it's a really good price, seeing as on eBay it's about £100 or so still, or even about £90 to £100 I'd say on eBay. And locally you can get deals, because these cards are getting quite old now, so you can get deals on the GTX 1070. And yes, if you can get it for like £70 odd or even less than that, certainly it's still a good buy, and it's still good for a very budget build or a budget flip. If you're going to try and flip PCs, the GTX 1070 is still a decent GPU to have. So yeah, I hope you like this little review and this little look back at the GTX 1070. This was the part 2. I did do a part 1, so you might want to go back onto that one to see a little bit more on the GTX 1070 if you're interested. And I'll leave the link in the top right hand corner here. Now, this is the second part of the GTX 1070. Now, let me know in the comments what you think of the GTX 1070 and how it's holding up. Obviously, please like the video to help me out, and please subscribe, which will help me out even more. And I hope you like this video, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.